Tell me the story of 538. Up until then, you're a poker player professionally, is that correct?
So I graduated from college in 2000, took a job as a consultant, was pretty unhappy at that job, and quit that job because I picked up poker, and all of a sudden I would stay up until sometimes all night, right? Then you kind of catch a cab to work at 9 in the morning, and I make far more money playing poker than I would at work. This is the so-called poker boom, where there were a lot of new players, and new players at poker are usually bad. There's a steep skill curve, learning curve. So when you have a lot of new blood in poker, then that's an opportunity. After 3 years of that, the US Congress passed a law to basically outlaw internet poker. I became much more curious about politics for that reason. I wanted to see the bastards who passed the law voted out of office, basically. This is 2006. I'm living in Chicago. Half a year later, a guy named Barack Obama begins to run for president. I'm not ashamed to admit that at 30 years old, living in Chicago, a guy from my school, University of Chicago, who seems very different than a typical presidential candidate, runs for president. Meanwhile, we're in this kind of post-Moneyball world, so there's like it's a good time to be really interested in data and really interested in politics, and that's kind of how I founded 538, which I worked at from 2008 until 2023, when I sold it eventually to the Walt Disney Company, a giant corporation, but now I'm back being independent again.
How did it start specifically in the beginning, and then why did you leave in 2023?
It started because most things that I do, it's because I want to build a better product, and the product I want doesn't exist somewhere else. I want to know, for example, this is spring 2008, whether Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama had a better chance of defeating John McCain. This very long, prolonged primary they had, and there were no good models of this, so I decided to kind of teach myself and build one myself. The reason I left 538 is because I didn't really have a lot of choice. We sold 538, or I sold 538 to ESPN, and then it was transferred to ABC News, which are both part of the Walt Disney Company. And one problem with the Walt Disney Company is that it's this giant, big glacier moving very slowly. And so you have almost no agency over your part of the business. If you have a pandemic and the theme park industry gets hit hard, or if TV streaming, the economics of that change a lot, or televised sports and ESPN, where the movie business changes and is radicalized in different ways, that has 10,000 times more effect on Disney's bottom line than whatever 538 is doing. So we faced a lot of headwinds. They laid off 3/4 of the staff one morning. My contract was up 6 months after that, and I knew at that point, I don't think they would have offered another renewal, but I knew at that point that I was going to leave, and it's been one of those things where I think I've been very lucky. I'm one of those people. I've learned that I much prefer independence. I much prefer not having to be too many people's boss. I much prefer kind of owning my own product and having incentives to work harder. And so, that's a case where I think I've had a good turn of fortune. Something that seemed at the time like it was a loss of an option has actually been very freeing in a lot of ways.
Was it completely independent until you sold it to ESPN?
There was a period where it was licensed to the New York Times for 3 years. So we licensed it to the New York Times for 3 years and then sold to Disney/ABC News/ESPN for 10 years.
So licensed means you made your content and they distributed it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So basically I blogged for the New York Times instead of for myself, but also got to work with their terrific graphics team and their editors. Now and then they'd even put me in print. So that was fine, right? Even though the Times is a very complicated institution that I have mixed feelings about, that was, I think, a pretty happy time. And then kind of from the moment I felt like where I sold to the Walt Disney Company, kind of always felt like a little bit cursed to me. I don't know why, right? And also, I think the kind of perception, there's something about kind of being scrappy and independent, even if people know that you have a pretty good lifestyle. And there's something about that is authentic and sympathetic, and it just kind of suits my temperament a lot more, I think.